Hi, this is Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop, and welcome to this free workshop where we're going to go over 5 of the biggest things that you can implement right now. These are 5 major eureka moments of mixing that will take your mixes to the next level. This workshop is for anyone who has been spending some time mixing in an audio production already, but feels like they've plateaued and just want to get through to the next level and break through some of the barriers that have been holding them back. My name is Justin Coletti. If you don't know me already, I have been obsessed with audio for more than 20 years. I started working on a 4-track cassette recorder when I was about 12 years old, and I never stopped. And in addition to working professionally in audio since at least my 20s and arguably my teens, I have been studying audio from not only books and putting into practice myself in my own work, but interviewing some of the best producers and engineers working today. And I'm always looking for the common threads that tie together the processes of the best people out there and figuring out what I can learn from them. What are some of the common denominators that are going to allow us to all figure out how to work better in our own studios? It's a question I keep on asking, and I keep on getting good and even better answers to. And I want to share 5 of these big breakthroughs with you today. Make sure that you have a few minutes to spare because we're going to get right into it with thing number 1. And this is about a tool, a piece of gear that is arguably the most important piece of gear in your studio when it comes to mixing. Everyone should have one of these, and not everyone in the studio has one. And even those who do, don't use it often enough. And it is, I'm holding mine right here, a notebook. This is high tech, right? Pieces of paper with words on them. And I know that I seem like kind of a jerk for saying, you need this studio piece of gear and it's a notebook. But I want to stress to you how important it is to have a piece of paper to write notes down on while mixing. And this is one of those big things that you can implement in your craft right now, because the take-home message here on point number 1 is you do your best mixing when you're not mixing. And this is something that countless producers and engineers at the top of their game have told me. They become masters of zooming in and zooming out. And one of the reasons so many of us get lost in the weeds when we are mixing or doing any audio work is because we get too zoomed in, too much of a single-minded focus on a thing we're doing now and not really seeing the big picture. I like to say that there's a battle always between 2 personalities whenever we're working in the studio inside of us. And those personalities are the visionary and the technician. And we need them both to be a complete craftsperson. The visionary is that wild-eyed, entrepreneurial dreamer, this person who has big visions, big ideas for what they can do, but maybe has a little bit of trouble implementing. This is someone who can step back and figure out what's most important, what we really need to focus on, the role of the producer in a session. And you need to be able to wear this hat, this zoomed out view. And then there's another person who's super important in any mix, the technician. And this is another personality inside of you. The person who gets zoomed in and is looking at a fine detail and is making sure they get one of these fine details just right. And to stop you from getting too bogged down in the minutia or too zoomed out into theorizing and not actually getting things done, making lists while you mix is huge. And you don't have to do this constantly throughout the entire mix. You have to do it, though, at least once. And this maybe is a process that you've been involved with before if you've ever worked remotely with clients who are sending you notes. And if you can get one big page of notes and then kind of go through them item by item, you can work fairly productively that way. Don't wait for the client to give you notes. Make those notes to yourself. And this is big idea number 1. I can't tell you the number of major producers and engineers who have told me this is part of their process. Bob Power, one of my favorites, talked about it with me extensively in an interview I did for an article called The Quirky Habits of Great Mixers. The idea is because you do your best mixing when you're not mixing, sometimes you need to step away, sit on the couch at the back of the room, get your hands off of the console, off the DAW, off of the mouse, and just listen. And you will be amazed how much progress you can make by stepping back, not touching anything, and just listening and making notes about what you'd like to tweak later. One thing that you might find is you start to write something down and realize you don't really need to tweak it, because over the course of 30 or 40 or 50 seconds, you say, no, actually it's fine the way that it is. And you're able to really figure out what things make the most sense and jump out at you. Then once you have that list of things you'd like to go in and fix, you can go in and be the single-minded person who's just executing on those things. And the speed at which this will drive up your productivity and make you so much more confident and do less chasing of your own tail, it's really going to be remarkable. You don't even have to do this on the couch in the back of the room if you don't have one or you want to get out of the room. Putting some headphones on and walking around, that can be a good way to go. You can sit down in a car, not while driving, and make notes on what you think really needs to be addressed. But I recommend doing this at least once in your actual studio environment where you really understand and know what's going on. So remember, you do some of your best mixing when you're not mixing, and to stop yourself from being too zoomed in or too zoomed out, and to be able to go back and forth between those two modes. The mindset of the visionary who knows what should change and the technician who's going to get there and implement it. You bring those two together by writing yourself your master list of notes and then going back and doing tweaks. Do this at least once on every mix at the end. And some of the best might do it more than once. You can also do this by listening to the client's original rough mixes and figure out what's working, what's not, what you'd like to address, what you think needs to be brought out. That's another thing I hear from a lot of the best mixers out there, that they always start by listening to the rough mix and taking notes on it and developing a game plan or an idea of what should be different in their final mix, what needs to be addressed and what should remain the same. That is absolutely huge. So get your notebook out and use it in the mix. Easily said, are you going to do it? And if you're going to do it, you're going to have much better results. Okay, thing number 2 that is common across the processes of every single one of the best producers and engineers and mixers I've had the opportunity to work with or interview. And that is they understand low end, and they understand the key point about the low end, that only one instrument can be the lowest one. Right? Logically, only one instrument can be the lowest. There's no other way it can be. It sounds like a no-brainer when I say it out loud, but you'd be surprised about how many people and for how long go through the mixing process without making this super important distinction. There are often at least two very low elements in the mix. Let's just say for argument's sake that's a kick drum and a bass guitar or a bass synth. Only one of those can be the lowest. One of them is going to be sitting in the sub-frequency range, and one of them is going to be sitting above that sub-frequency range with more of its energy, perhaps in the upper bass. For those of you who know frequencies, the subs, that might be the stuff you can hear from 20 hertz to say 60 hertz, and then the upper bass maybe 70, 80 hertz up to 200 hertz. So only one thing can be the lowest in your mix. And you've got to decide, is it going to be that kick drum or is it going to be that bass? Which one to choose? Well, fortunately, the arrangement is going to have some clues in there, some ideas about which should be the lowest. Generally, the instrument that is more up-tempo of those two, that's playing hits more often, say quarter notes or eighth notes as opposed to whole notes, the busier of the two elements is generally going to be the higher one. And the less busy of those two elements is generally going to be the lower one with more of its energy in the sub-frequency range. So if you have a fairly static kick drum and a fairly busy bass line, chances are that bass line is going to sit above that steady kick drum. So maybe the bass should have a little bit more of its energy in that 100 to 200 hertz range, where your kick drum is going to have its lowest fundamental energy, say in that below 100 range. You don't want two bass instruments clouding the same part of the low end. They will get in the way of each other. And you can actually sometimes be fairly radical at the mixing stage in getting rid of low frequency on one of these things or the other. If you have a really busy, interesting kick drum that's sitting preferably on top of a really big, steady, low, beefy bass line, you can get rid of some of the subs or really decrease some of the subs fairly significantly on that kick and not have it matter that much, because you're looking for a punchier, knockier kick drum, and you really want the low end, the deep bass on that bass guitar to blossom, or vice versa. But the important thing is making a decision about which one's going to be the lowest and allowing that one to really occupy the lowest space. And if needed, making fairly significant cuts to the low end of the other element. It could be very little cuts. It could be very big cuts. Really, in the time we have now, and without me hearing mix you're working on and getting in there with you, it's hard to say how much low end you can take away from the element that's supposed to be higher, or how much low end you can add to the lowest element. It's not an answer I can give you, but it's a principle that you can take into every mix with you. And you should really internalize this and ask yourself concretely towards the beginning of each mix, which is going to be the lowest, the kick drum or the bass? Or if there's three elements doing a bass line, a kick drum, a bass, and a bass synth, where are they going to sit in the hierarchy of the low end? Once you've decided that, you're going to get much more powerful low end. That's going to sound a lot bigger. And sometimes this is going to counterintuitively be because you're making one of the elements a little bit lighter in the low frequencies, so that you can allow the deepest one to be a bit amped up in the lowest frequencies. Similarly, you can actually make dips in your lowest instrument. So if you have this really solid deep bass, you might be able to carve some of the 100 hertz area out of that bass to allow the kick drum to speak more in that area. Ideally, this kind of thinking is happening every step in the process, and that's something that's explicitly or implicitly happening at the production and arrangement and recording level, and not just at the mix level. You're going to have a harder time with this if it hasn't been thought about in advance. But even if it hasn't, you can start making these decisions and getting much better low end than ever before, and getting much better low end than 90% or more of the people who are competing with you mix-wise, who don't understand this principle and have low end that suffers because of it. All right, our next big breakthrough principle, number 3, is that to mix really well, the best place to start a mix is generally not the beginning. Starting in the middle of a mix is often much better for you when you're setting your initial levels and balances and bus processing. And this is because what happens in the intro of most songs? Well, in the intro of most songs, they're often sparse compared to the rest of the song. Maybe you're working on a song that just starts with an acoustic guitar or just a synth pad and a vocal, something like that. But by the time you get to the chorus, there's going to be a full drum kit, and there's going to be all these additional synths or guitars or keyboards or background vocals or chimes or percussion elements. And all of a sudden, you get to the middle of the mix, this happening chorus, and your whole mix stops working because you started mixing in the beginning and you tried to set great balances for the sparse section. The best place to start your initial static mix, where you're just getting your balances, is often in a fairly significant chorus that has most of the elements already in it. Because if you can make that really dense section work, the rest of the mix, by comparison, is going to be a piece of cake. Every once in a while, you may be able to find that you can actually undo some of your most extreme processing that you might do in a dense chorus to make everything fit together. But when you're first really diving in and spending time adjusting things and trying out a lot of different things, make sure you're doing that in a fairly dense section. Otherwise, you're going to come up with compressor settings and balance settings that work when things are sparse. But as soon as the level and the complexity and the density of things come up, it's going to be a total mess, and you're going to have big choruses that, instead of sounding big, sound choked, like their life has been squeezed out of them. So this is another big thing. All right, big principle number 4 that is common among everyone who mixes really well is that they either work on perfecting their room and speaker environment that they're in, or they work on understanding it really well. And these are two different approaches. And if you have unlimited time and money, the best thing to do out of these two is make sure that your speaker and room environment is as best as it possibly can be. That can cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fortunately, you can improve your room or speaker environment with some acoustic treatment and a little bit spent on speakers. The acoustic treatment in this room didn't need to be tens of thousands of dollars worth to get really good results. And in a lot of smaller rooms, you might be able to spend between $1,000 and $2,000 in acoustic treatment and have much better results than you've ever had before. This is going to improve the sound of any speakers that you put into that room. And it's some of the best money that you can spend in the studio. If you don't have the ability to buy some commercial panels, then one of the things that you can do is do some DIY acoustic panels. And I have a ton of resources for you on that we can talk about later. But assuming that you don't have a lot of time or money to put into your system in your room, or that you've already got as good as you reasonably can, the other major thing is really learning and understanding the room and speaker environment you're in. And honestly, this is important even if you did spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on your room. And one of the best ways to do this is by referencing. Referencing meaning bringing in records that you love the sound of, listening to them in your room environment. There's a lot of ways to do referencing, but one of the biggest and best to start out with that's a must for everyone is listen to great sounding music in your room. And also listen to great sounding music that you already know the sound of, and listen to it again and again in your environment. But don't only listen to it in your environment. If your room is not ideal, chances are you're going to be doing the car check or the headphone check, where you walk around with your phone and listen to some tracks on consumer headphones, or you're listening in the car, wherever you may be, and really getting to know your system by listening to your work in multiple places. But it's important that you don't only listen to your work in multiple places, but listen to competitive work in the same places. So if you're doing a car check where you're taking your mixes out to the car, make sure you're listening to a lot of music in that car shortly beforehand of you listening to your stuff, or at least within the same day, so that you've really gotten in tune to what that stereo system sounds like. And you don't want to do that by just listening to tracks off of the radio, if people still listen to the radio, because if you're listening to things off of FM or AM radio, or in many cases even things like satellite radio, there can be processing on top of those mixes that are going to significantly change what the original mixes sounded like. So you're going to be wanting to listen to really virgin, untreated audio files, totally raw off your phone or MP3 player or whatever you're using to listen to tracks. When you're doing this kind of referencing, you also want to make sure that you're level matching things. If you're listening to commercially released tracks much louder than yours, they're going to sound much better, because whenever something sounds louder, it sounds better to us. So that's one thing that you want to remember, is you want to level match these tracks, turn up the level on your tracks, or print out a reference master with some limiting on it so you can hear it next to other commercially released tracks in other environments along with yours. Referencing is absolutely big, and all of the biggest and best producers and engineers do it. However, the better they get, they're not necessarily A/B referencing, listening to a commercially released master and then listening to the thing that they're working on right now. That's not always the way it happens. They might do it just by listening to a bunch of tracks early on in the day in their studio to really kind of get acclimated and in tune for the day. Others may A/B more directly. I don't recommend A/Bing too much, too directly right in the middle of the mixing process, because you might confuse yourself. But if you ever have a question about, say, whether a vocal is loud enough or too loud, whether a snare drum is loud enough or too loud, sometimes taking a break in the middle of the day and refreshing yourself by listening to some other great commercial releases and getting a sense for just how hot they push the vocal or that snare drum in their mixes, or just how much or how little they're using reverb or delay, how dry or how wet their stuff feels, that can be a good thing to do. When it comes to mixing, I don't recommend directly A/Bing and trying to mimic the sounds of other mixes, but that kind of resetting and reminding yourself of what really good music sounds like in your room can be an essential part of the process. All right, and the fifth major principle that's really been common across all of the major producers and engineers and mixers that I have worked with, studied, interviewed, watched work, is that they're generally going pretty quickly in the beginning, getting the mix roughed in, and starting by focusing predominantly on levels at first. Some engineers do this with everything turned on and start balancing faders. Some do it with everything muted and turning on the first and most important elements and then bringing things in one by one. And I can give you a lot of strategies and a kind of roadmap on how to take either of those approaches. But for right now, I think the big core principle is that in the beginning, you don't want to get too zoomed in on any one element. And first start by creating a general set of balances, a rough static mix from which to work that you might apply automation to later on. This is not to say that no one's ever successful by just bringing up the drums first and focusing on the kick drum for a while, and then when they get that right, they move to the snare drum, etc., etc., etc. But a strategy that tends to be a lot more productive, a lot faster, and lead to a lot more confidence is first getting everything roughed in, focusing on balances and balances alone first, and then going for a deeper dive on those elements that really need it. I would suggest, and again, this is backed up by my observations of so many of the greats working today, is that once they get things roughed in, they'll then start to look at some degree of bus processing. So a lot of the mix happens with just getting things roughed in and then going to bus processing, often on a master stereo bus, but sometimes also on subgroup buses, an all drums bus, an all guitar bus, an all vocal bus, and applying some general dynamic range control, in some cases a general EQ, on some of those buses. And this is not to say that we're not going to go in and tweak individual elements, or that we're looking for our bus compressor to mix for us, or that we're looking to just apply global EQ to the track and nothing at all to the individual tracks as if we're a mastering engineer or something. It's not to say that at all. It is to say that the way so many of the best start is to rough in their mixes first, focusing mostly on balances, maybe paying some special attention to setting a really important effect on a really important element, and then pretty quickly getting their bus processing going so that they can mix through their bus processing. And I can give you a lot of strategies on both setting your balances initially and setting your bus processors. And if you can't hear bus compression and the nuances of it, I have some exercises that can really help you with that. But if you start implementing these 5 simple habits and strategies right away, you are going to hear really dramatic differences in your results. Man, I could go on about all this stuff for hours, and I do in my full-length course, Mixing Breakthroughs. If you've enjoyed this, if you put these to the test, implement some of this stuff, and really hear the dramatic differences it can make for you, Mixing Breakthroughs might be the course for you. We have 5 modules, one that's all about setting balances, one that's all about applying compression, one that's all about applying EQ, one that's all about applying reverb and effects like that, and then so much more. Mixing Breakthroughs is probably the most useful thing I've ever done for other people who really just want to break through the level at which they are now working. If you feel like you've plateaued or you're starting to get okay results, but it often takes too long and you're spending so much time second guessing yourself and you don't know when you're really done, Mixing Breakthroughs pulls not just from my own experience, but the experience of interviewing, talking to, and watching the work of the best mixers today. I've had the luxury to do that with Sonic Scoop, to interview, to be in the studio with so many of the greats. And the thing that I'm really interested in is finding the commonalities between them, how they can work so much faster, so much more efficiently, with so much more creativity, with so much less second guessing themselves and their own work, so much less running around in circles. And there really are commonalities there. I've taken some of them into my own work, and it's made me not only do better work, but also have a better time doing it with a lot less stress, a lot more speed, and with a greater feeling of confidence that I bring into my interactions with my clients, with getting more work, and with showing off the results of my work in the end. If you think you can benefit from something like this, Mixing Breakthroughs is absolutely going to improve the way that you mix. No question about it. It comes with 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you feel like you didn't get better at mixing fast from Mixing Breakthroughs, well, then you can get your entire purchase price back. This very rarely happens. But I also want to let you know who this course is not for. Mixing Breakthroughs is not for everyone. It is not a course where you're going to sit down and watch someone else mix. In fact, there's not really much in the way of audio examples and watching me mix in this course at all. I wanted to create something so unique and so different, not just to be different, but to get better results for you. Almost all of the audio samples that you're going to hear in Mixing Breakthroughs are going to be your own work, hands-on on your own DAW. This course is driven by exercises where you have to do the work. You have to put your butt in the chair. But if you go through the exercises in this course, you will get better at mixing. Not only will you get better at it, but you'll have a much better roadmap, a much better strategy, plan of attack for actually implementing, getting started, and getting finished on every mix. You'll have a clear idea of how to begin, what to do in the middle, and how to get past the finish line with the results that you want. This is not a course for complete beginners. If you've never mixed before, you don't quite know what a compressor is at all, this is not the course for you. If you have heard most of the basic terms regarding what a compressor is and you're familiar with the idea of an EQ and how it works, then this course might be for you. It's really for people who've been starting to get some okay results, but they really feel like they haven't broken through to the next level on mixing. It's really not about watching me mouse around and mix in front of you like so many other courses are. This course is about me almost being like your virtual mix coach. And I'm going to give you some exercises that you can put into practice right now on your own mixes, in your own DAW, with your own multi-tracks that will allow you to not only mix that track better, but to get better at mixing in the future. You are going to come away not only with better skills and a better developed ear, but you're also going to come away with strategies, a roadmap, a set of ideas on how to begin, what to do in the middle, and how to get past that finish line without you second guessing yourself, without being nervous to share these results with the wider world, and without wasting so much of your precious time going over the same things again and again and again. If this sounds attractive to you, if you want to mix better, faster, more creatively, with more confidence and less second guessing than ever before, if you want to break through your current plateaus on mixing, then Mixing Breakthroughs is the course for you. Check it out at mixingbreakthroughs.com or by clicking the link down below. I guarantee that if you go through this course, you are going to come out on the other side able to mix better than ever before. I'll even give you session templates that you can use to work much more quickly with much better results than in the past. If you're ready to take your mixes to a totally new level, to mix a truly professional level, and not just in sound quality, but also in your efficiency and in your timeliness and speed and confidence, then Mixing Breakthroughs is the course for you. This has been Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop. Hope to see you on the other side.